Hello viewers, welcome to Disease Reversal and Mitigation Studio. Once again, we are grateful to God for granting us this wonderful and blessed moment to be able to share in a very important topic that is affecting many families in Kenya. Today we'll be looking at the cancer scare. And I know if you know the one, you may have loved ones who have been affected by the scourge of cancer. Now, do you know the meaning of the word cancer? The term cancer comes from the Latin word to mean crab, and this is the organism which moves in all directions when scared. Therefore, cancer can grow into any direction from the site of origin. In order to be able to understand the meaning of cancer, because diseases originated with sin. Now let's go back to the book of Genesis and let's see the origin of decay and death. We will be reading from Genesis chapter 3 and verse 17 all the way to 19. And from your Bible you can see that God said unto Adam, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it, then cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. And then verse 18, thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. Verse 19 we are told, in the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread till thou return to the ground, for out of it thou wast taken, and unto the dust thou shalt return. Now this is the first time the mention of decay has been expressed in the Bible. And this is the origin of diseases after sin. So the ultimate event after all these degeneration and decay is death, where man returns to the ground dead and then starts to decay. But do you know, before you die, death is a process. You start the process of what we call aging of cells and then loss of function of those cells before they die. So the human body, if it did not regenerate, is constantly dying from wearing away of cells. But the question we are asking here, because it lies at the heart of the cancer disease, the question we are asking is, what mechanisms has God instituted to clean out dead cells, or in any case to recycle those cells so that they are able to regenerate and ensure that any dead cell that cannot be recycled is eliminated from the body? Because if these cells are not, if they are not eliminated, if they are allowed to stay in the body dead, then it's important to know that decomposition will occur. It is the end result of death of body cells. Decomposition has to occur, and whatever carries out decomposition when man dies is the same thing that carries out decomposition when cells die in the body. So there's a common factor. Decomposition after death is carried out by fungus. It's important you know that decomposition within the body of cells that have been rendered functionless and they are now dead is also carried out by fungus. So God has instituted mechanisms to get rid of dead cells from the body, either by recycling them and also getting rid of the biological waste so that fungus does not root in those cells. Now, if you read 2 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 1, God gives direct counsel on bodily cleanliness, because cleanliness is vital for health. God does not only demand from us spiritual cleanliness, he also demands that we have bodily cleanliness. And this is what we read in verse 1 of 2 Corinthians chapter 7. Having therefore these promises, dearly beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all the filthiness of the flesh and spirit, of perfect holiness in the fear of God. Now, what we call perfect holiness is both spiritual and fleshly cleanliness. God does not entertain unclean people. That is, people who are unclean in their person. If you read Exodus chapter 30, verse 20, it continues the same emphasis. When you go into the tabernacle of the congregation, they shall wash with water that they die not, or when they come near to the altar to minister, to burn offering made by fire unto the Lord. So, take note of the strict directions by Moses, that before they come to the tabernacle, or before the high priest comes to the tabernacle, he has to wash, otherwise he died. So the punishment of uncleanliness was death. And most likely, if we allow our bodies to go or to be unclean, we are likely to contract a scourge that will lead to our death. And this is the picture I want to generate concerning cancer. It has a lot to do with uncleanliness in the body. You come to discover this later. When you read Hebrews chapter 10, verse 22, it lays the same emphasis on cleanliness. It says, let us draw near with a true heart, in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience, and our bodies washed with pure water. Again, the Lord demands that we have clean bodies. We might think this was just a spiritual counsel, but eventually we are going to discover that God would want us to be clean in the same way our spirits are clean. Our spirits cannot be unclean, yet we are untidy in clothing and in person. Now, the same words from the Bible have been emphasized elsewhere in inspired writings. Reading from the book CTBH, page 105 and paragraph 1, we are told that one of the most prolific sources of disease is the transgression of the laws of life in regard to personal habits. Order and cleanliness are the laws of heaven. Note this, order and cleanliness are the laws of heaven. You cannot enjoy health, good physical and spiritual health, if you're not orderly, if you're not organized, and if you're not clean. God requires from us order and cleanliness if we are to enjoy perfect health. So you can confirm that when you read that book, CTBH 105.1. Now, let's read from the book HL 143.2. It has the following to say. In regard to cleanliness, God requires no less of his people now than he did of the ancient Israel. A neglect of cleanliness will induce disease. Did you know that uncleanliness will bring disease? So whether this uncleanliness is external, it will bring skin diseases, and if the uncleanliness is internal, inside the body. It will generate diseases such as leprosy and cancer. It's among the diseases that come as a result of uncleanliness. There's a lot of biological waste in the body that is leading to thriving of cancer in the body. So the Ten Commandments spoken by Jehovah from Sinai, this is what we are reading from the same book, HL 143.2. That the Ten Commandments spoken by Jehovah from Sinai cannot live in the hearts of persons of disorderly, filthy habits. So the law of God cannot be placed in a man or in a woman who is disorderly and filthy. If ancient Israel could not so much as listen to the proclamation of that holy law unless they had obeyed the injunction of Jehovah and had cleaned their clothing. Now, how can that sacred law be written upon the hearts of persons who are not cleanly in person to start with? That your person must be clean. Then next, you have to be clean in your clothing. And then your houses also has to be clean. So it is impossible for God to implant His law in your heart if you're dirty in your clothes, dirty in your person, and dirty in your house. I want you to remember the strict laws about leprosy in the houses, to the extent that a person could be forced to demolish an entire house because of uncleanliness, because this would cause leprosy. Did you know that the same uncleanliness, if it's inside the house of your body, that is, in the sanctuary of your body, did you know it can cause the same thing? A leprous body. So the inspired writings continues to say, we'll be reading a very important text here so that we can get the connection between uncleanliness and cancer. Unclean animals will lead to uncleanliness, and this will cause disease, and such diseases are leprosy. Now, the same word used to describe somebody who has leprosy, that is the word unclean, is used to describe an animal that God did not authorize to be eaten. So an unclean animal will lead to disease, and some of those diseases it will cause is leprosy. Now let's read from the book 4ASG 146.2 concerning this. The eating of pork has produced scrofula, leprosy, and cancerous humors. Pork eating is still causing the most intense suffering to the human race. Depraved appetites crave those things which are the most injurious to health. The curse which has rested heavily upon the earth and has been felt by the whole race of mankind has also been felt by the animals. The beasts have degenerated in size and length of years. They have been made to suffer more than they otherwise would by the wrong habits of man. It's important to note that unclean animals such as pigs will lead to diseases, and diseases are unclean. So the unclean animal will introduce toxins into your body that will cause death of your body cells. And if your cells die, you are creating a very conducive habitat for fungal growth. If fungus grows in your cells, you're going to contract leprosy and cancer and scrofula or swelling or infection of the lymph nodes. So all those are forms of leprosy. Whether there's scrofula, that is infected lymph nodes or sick lymph nodes, or cancer, which is also a form of leprosy. We continue to read from the same book, that is Spiritual Gifts, Volume 4a, and it says that there are but a few animals that are free from disease. They have been made to suffer greatly for the want of light, pure air, and wholesome food. When they are fattened, they are often confined in closed stables and are not permitted to exercise and to have free circulation of air. Many poor animals are left to breathe the poison or filth which is left in the barns and stables. Now, the manner in which animals that are being reared for sale in the market to the slaughterhouses, the manner in which they are reared is not conducive for their health and for the health of the consumers of the meat, because they are zero graze. They are confined in areas, in stables where they don't have a lot of free space. There's a lot of accumulation of filth where they are stepping, and then the air is polluted. So they are inhaling these poisons on a daily basis. Now, the animals themselves will become sick, and whoever consumes such an animal will also become sick, because you'll be introducing toxins into your body that will kill your cells, and you'll be creating a very conducive environment for fungal growth in your body. And that is how you get leprosy and you get cancer. Now, moving on to conclude that same book, 4ASG, we read the following: that their lungs will not long remain healthy while inhaling such impurities. Disease is conveyed to the liver, and the entire system of the animal is diseased. They are killed and prepared for the market, and people eat freely of this poisonous animal food. Much disease is caused in this manner, but people cannot be made to believe that indeed it's the meat they have eaten that has poisoned their blood and caused their suffering. So one thing you need to note is that the disease was contracted by the animal by inhalation. But how it ended up affecting the liver and the entire system, it is because the disease has metastasized. And this is a word that you will hear most often when we are describing cancer and its complications. It's normal for diseases to move about the entire system once they have been contracted by a single system. And this is what is happening to the animals. Once they have inhaled the toxins, and the toxins are fungal toxins, because it's fungus that loves damp, wet, and warm places. So, and the fungal spores are easily to be inhaled. So once they are inhaled in the lungs, there's a possibility that they are going to metastasize all the way to the rest of the organs in the body. So they can spread and they can affect the lungs together with the entire system because of their ability to metastasize. Now, if you read from the book Ministry, from the book Education 189.5, inspired writings say that it is on diseased, lifeless organisms that fungus roots. It is the idle mind that is Satan's workshop. So in the same way that Satan and sin loves idle mind, so fungus, which is a symbol of sin and Satan, by the way, fungus also means leprosy. Fungus also prefers tissues and cells that are functionless, they are diseased, and they are lifeless or dead. So it is possible to find fungus in your body if you do not have a very effective mechanism of getting rid of dead cells in your body. So if you do not have an excretory system that is functional, that is the 4 avenues of excretion: the kidneys, the lungs, the colon, and the skin, most likely you're going to accumulate toxins, and these toxins comprise of dead cells, and if they are not eliminated, they'll become a breeding ground for fungus. Fungus is going to root. And fungus loves dead tissues and decaying ones. So if you continue to read in Ministry of Healing, page 276.4, we get the following: every form of uncleanliness will lead to disease. Every form of uncleanliness, including internal uncleanliness. Death-producing germs abound in dark, neglected corners, in decaying refuse, in dampness and mold and must. No waste vegetables or heaps of fallen leaves should be allowed to remain near the house to decay and poison the air. Nothing unclean or decaying should be tolerated within the home. In towns or cities regarded as perfectly health, many an epidemic of fever has been traced to decaying matter about the dwelling of some careless householder. So it is usual to find fungus in tissues that are decaying and they are dead. And this is the truth of the matter. So God has constructed a very effective mechanism in the body to ensure that all dead cells, all functionless cells, or cells that have been degenerated, they are either recycled, because the body also saves a lot of energy by recycling those cells. But if there is any waste material that is no longer useful to the body, it has to be eliminated out of the system. If this material is not eliminated, then you can be sure fungus is going to grow in the body. And by default, fungus just comes in the absence of life. We know God did not create fungus because from the beginning there was life and there was no decay. But once sin settled in the world, by default, fungus, just like sin, just comes. Where there is no righteousness, there is sin. And where there is no life, there is fungus, automatically. So we have to ensure that our cells are functional, they are full of life all the time, in order to avert the presence of fungus. Now, if you read in another book, CG, page 108.2, God tells us that scrupulous cleanliness is essential to both physical and mental health. So God also reminds us that we need to ensure that we have both physical and mental health. And one of the factors that will improve that health is bodily cleanliness. So impurities are constantly being thrown off from the body through the skin. Its millions of pores are quickly clogged unless kept clean by frequent bathing. So now you can see the danger of not bathing, because anytime you're sweating, you are generating waste that will clog the millions of pores on your skin. And if you clog your system, you are not only blocking your skin from getting rid of the waste, you're making your body to accumulate waste that will clog the other elimination mechanisms or systems in the body. And therefore, you have a cascade of injuries across all the excretory organs in the body. So it is worth noting. Now, let's remember that cancer is a destructive disease. It has claimed many lives, especially in Kenya and across the world. We have so many deaths that have been witnessed, even among the political class. So many people have died, others of pancreatic cancer, others of ovarian cancer, and cancer has not been selective. If we have not, or if the subjects have not heeded to the laws of life, then cancer also has not been selective. It has eliminated everybody without discriminating. And therefore, the condition for avoiding it is to ensure that you're informed about the laws of health and you're following strictly these laws of health. Now, let's get to the mainstream science or conventional wisdom, and let's see the definition of cancer. So cancer is said to be a large group of more than 200 diseases that are characterized by the uncontrolled growth and spread of abnormal cells. So according to conventional wisdom, we have cancer cells that multiply rapidly. As they multiply, they have certain defects. Due to the rapid multiplication, they have not been corrected. And because they have a growth factor, they continue to grow and to form tumors without that division being regulated. It is also said that after this multiplication, the cells can spread to other tissues or systems in the body. So that is the conventional. Definition of cancer. Now, looking at the cancer burden in the world, cancer is the leading cause of death globally, because it's estimated that about 20 million new cases of cancer are diagnosed every year, and half of these cases will die ultimately because of complications of cancer. So among the cancers that are leading in death in the world is lung cancer, followed by breast cancer, and then colorectal cancer. These are among the leading causes of death among cancer patients in the world. Now, in Kenya, to be specific, is that cancer is the third leading of death in Kenya, with about 45,000 new cases being diagnosed yearly, and more than 50% of these cases die annually as a result of cancer. So the burden of cancer in Kenya, it's very high, and among the leading causes of death from cancer in Kenya is breast cancer, cervical cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancer. Those are among the very common cancers in the world. In Kenya, sorry. So please note, some of the major cancers in Kenya, they have something to do with hormonal imbalance, such as breast cancer, cervical cancer, and prostate cancer. They have little to do with genetic mutation, but a lot to do with hormonal imbalances. So that one to start with may object or may discredit that proposition of science that cancer comes as a result of genetic mutation. Now, there are two major types of cancers. There are many ways in which cancer is classified depending on the site and the tissue involved, but we need to know there are only two major types of cancers. So cancer may affect a solid organ, and cancer may also affect the blood cells, such that we have solid tumors and we also have liquid tumors. So those are the two major types of cancers. Of importance is to know what are the risk factors for cancer. And among the risk factors of cancer, we have toxins. So these toxins may be from cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, including prescribed drugs. We also have environmental pollution. That is pollution we witness in the atmosphere, on land and water, by chemicals, even by radiation. According to conventional wisdom, they talk of age and genetics as a risk factor, but we have a lot of objection to that. But we know that a major risk factor for cancer is chronic inflammation. This includes chronic infections, injuries, or pro-inflammatory foods that may inflame your body on a daily basis. And then we have sedentary lifestyle. People who do not exercise, who spend most of their time sitting down. Then chronic stress is a major contributor to cancer. And then we have nutritional deficiencies and excesses. So both undernutrition and overnutrition will lead to cancer. By the way, eating a lot will cause chronic inflammation to your body, and this may predispose you to cancer. Now, according to conventional wisdom, cancer takes the following course in order to grow or to cause death in a subject. To start with, there is a genetic mutation which will lead to DNA damage. And then once we have mutation, it causes the cells to ignore signals that tell them to stop dividing. So that is the backbone of cancer development or cancer progression. That there is a genetic change which causes the cells to ignore a signal to stop them to grow, and we have what we call immortal cells that continue to grow. The other idea, it's on the activation of oncogenes. So these are factors that favor growth of cancer, and inactivation of tumor suppressor genes. So these are the factors that would have disfavored, or they would have antagonized the growth of cancer. So they are suppressed. Then the other explanation is that tumors or tumor cells have the ability to stimulate growth of new blood vessels around them so as to continue to supply them with oxygen and nutrients. It is also said that cancer cells can manipulate the surrounding tissues and the immune cells in order to support their growth and facilitate immune evasion. So conventional wisdom claims that cancer cells have the ability to evade immunity. But the backbone of cancer initiation and progression is genetic mutation. So we have our objections to the idea of genetic mutation as a cause of cancer. Now, before we present our objections as far as what causes cancer is concerned, now let's look at the origin of chemotherapy, because it is a standard treatment of cancer today. Where did antineoplastics or chemotherapy originate from? So in the year 1943, Adolf Hitler deployed a chemical weapon, used mustard gas against soldiers in Italy, and when the gas was sprayed on the soldiers, it was found to cause depletion of white blood cells among the victims. Some of them actually died. So human trials were made later. Trial experiments were done later with mice, and the same gas, the nitrogen mustard, was found to shrink tumors in mice. Later human trials were conducted in the 1940s. Now, these human trials were unethical. These are the trials you hear that they led to what we call the Nuremberg Code, because those who are recruited into these trials did not sign informed consent. They were forced. They were forced to get into these trials, and these substances were injected into them forcefully, and most of them ended up dying. But they also noted that those who had tumors, those tumors were shrinking. So in the year 1949, the Food and Drug Administration, that is the agency dealing with regulation of drugs in US, they approved this first chemical weapon that was used by Hitler against soldiers. And it became a standard of treatment of cancer patients. All chemotherapy drugs have been developed on the principle of acting on fast dividing cells non-selectively by killing them, and as the regimen kills the cancer, it kills the normal cells as well. So we have the methods of treatment that we have today emanating from chemical weapons that were used during the Second World War. Now, today we do not have a method of diagnosing cancer in its early stages. Despite the improvement in technology, we have good machines, but we do not have a modality for picking out cancer in its early stages. So there is no genetic test that is able to map out the mutated genes in anybody of a cancer that will arise in future. And that is why we are saying that there's a lot of objection to the idea that cancer is as a result of genetic mutation. Because we are asking, why don't we have a genetic test that can capture those genes before the disease develops? So there should be something else that is leading to cancer that conventional wisdom is not willing to disclose. Either they are ignorant about it or they knowingly do not want to disclose it, because it might tamper or it might disrupt the gravy train of profits that they're enjoying today. Because cancer, it's a very lucrative investment. It's an industry. Okay, now we want to go to the actual causes of cancer. We want to know how cancer arises. And in order to know how cancer arises, we must look at a very important natural process that happens in the body once dead cells or sick cells are noted to be in the body. And the process is called autophagy. Now, autophagy involves the formation of a double membrane vesicle called an autophagosome. So this is a molecule that engulfs cellular debris, that is waste material from the cells, and then it digests them. And after digestion, part of the energy that is retrieved from those cells is reused by other cells. And what is left should be eliminated and taken out of the body. Now, if this process is successful, this process we call autophagy. Autophagy simply means self-digestion. That is, the body has built a mechanism of recycling its own dead cells or functionless cells so that we do not have biological waste inside the body. If this process is successful, it is unlikely that we are going to have waste in the body. If we support this system, we are going to get rid of the waste. If it happens, this process is not successful, so we have accumulation of this dead waste. So it aggregates in certain areas of the body, and because these cells are functionless, they are lifeless, meaning they are dead and they are diseased, then they are going to attract fungus. So the body will encapsulate them because it's unable to remove them. So it will form a capsule around them and isolate them at different sites in the body. So once they are isolated, they form what we call a tumor that is benign. So a tumor that is nicely encapsulated and isolated, it can easily be surgically removed. So if we supported the body by removing that tumor, because the body has denied that tumor supply of blood and nutrients and oxygen. So it's the high time, by using our own intelligence, to get rid of that tumor surgically, because it's no longer useful. And that is the best your body could have done. But did you know that if that tumor lingers in the body for a long time, it becomes a breeding ground for fungus, because fungus loves diseased and dead cells that have no function. So that is how the body attracts fungus. And when it starts to grow on that tissue, on that tumor, most likely the fungus will invade. It will start to produce roots that will enter the bloodstream and release spores that will get into the bloodstream and eventually end up in other tissues and other body systems. And that is what science today calls metastasis, but it doesn't know that sickly dead cells with no function, they attract fungal growth. So concerning the same process we call autophagy, the body hates redundancy of cells. And let's see what the body does with this redundancy. One of the survival mechanisms of the body is that when the cells are deprived of nutrients or oxygen, Then autophagy, which is self-digestion, will ramp up the breakdown of the essential parts of that cell, which will further provide energy for survival of the rest of the cells. So whatever cells that are redundant will be broken down, they will be used up, but if there is any debris, remember that debris will be eliminated by the excretion organs. So that is a very important point to know. Let me tell you something. Do you know that part of the nutrients generated by the breakdown and the recycling of those cells, do you know part of or some of the components generated, some of the nutrients generated are glucose and glutamine? The lifeless cells and the dead cells, once they are broken out, they generate a lot of glucose energy and glutamine. And interestingly, do you know that these are the same nutrients fungus needs in order to grow? So sometimes we will talk of cancerous cells. And therefore, there is a debate between cancerous cells and fungus. But these cancerous cells is what they call fungus. But they will not admit it's fungus. So, because cancerous cells also love glucose and glutamine. We'll come to confirm this. But remember also that fungus thrives on glucose and glutamine. And we'll be looking at this in a few minutes. Now, the other role in autophagy is if autophagy is impaired, then it will lead to aging. So the cells will start becoming diseased and they will die. And there will be many chronic diseases. Among these diseases are neurodegenerative conditions such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's. Did you ever imagine that Parkinson's could be as a result of accumulation of toxic waste in the body leading to inflammation of the nerve cells in the brain? And it will also lead to cancer. So this debris, if not properly digested and eliminated out of the body, it will lead to cancer. And of importance is, if autophagy is successful, it will prevent cancer by ensuring that the dead cells are eliminated, and therefore we do not have accumulation of dead cells that will generate or that will provide nutrients for the fungus. Nutrients such as glutamine and glucose, which are needed by the fungus for its own growth. So the other mechanism is autophagy is stimulated by stressing cells with low insulin and appetite. It's important to know that if you want to deprive the cancer cells, as they are called, I'll talk of the fungal cells. If you want to deprive them of energy, then ensure that you have intermittent fasting or you're skipping meals. And when you skip meals, you ensure or you make the levels of insulin generated by the pancreas to be low. So if the insulin generated is low, then there is no way these fungal cells or cancerous cells are able to utilize glucose. That is why fasting, intermittent fasting, skipping meals is very important in getting rid of cancerous or fungal cells, because it will keep the levels of insulin low, and if insulin is low, those fungal cells or cancerous cells are not able to take up. They are not able to take up glucose and glutamine, which they need for their survival. Now, of importance here is to know that cancer cells are gluttonous for glucose and glutamine. Cancer cells, the cancerous cells depend on glucose and glutamine. How? And this is also the same with the fungal cells. The fungi depend on glucose as their primary carbon and energy source of growth, while glutamine is essential for nitrogen metabolism, growth regulation, and stress resistance. So glucose acts as the preferred energy source for metabolic processes like glycolysis, and glutamine is vital for synthesizing amino acids, nucleotides, and maintaining nitrogen. Do you know that the cancerous cells or the fungal cells, they grow very fast? In fact, one of the characteristics of fungal cells is fast growth. But for this growth to be fast, then they have to have glucose for energy, and they have to have glutamine to make amino acids or nucleotides so that they can grow. So the mass of the tumor cell depends largely on glutamine for the amino acids, but they need energy to spread and energy to metabolize from the glucose that is provided by those cells that are dying. And it is important for you to note that where fungus is growing, it is going to attract a lot of blood supply, because the intention, the natural mechanisms of the body are to isolate the area that has been affected by the fungus, because fungus produces poisons and the body has to isolate that area. So it has to do that by supplying that area with a lot of, supplying the cells in that area with a lot of oxygen, nutrients, blood supply, to ensure that that area remains to be isolated. And as more cells come, then we have the mass enlarging, growing bigger and bigger. And eventually you have a very big mass, not because of the dead cells in the mass that are growing so fast, but because of the effort that the body has taken to ensure there's a lot of supply, to ensure that the cells close to the poisonous area are constantly supplied with nutrients. But in the process of that supply of nutrients, some of them die and they add to the mass of that tumor. Now, before we go to the objections we have concerning cancer, let's look at some important organs here in nature that help us to know why, that may give us a lead as to how we can combat this cancer scare. Now, did you know that there are some organs in the body that rarely get cancer? And one of the organs is the heart, the skeletal muscle. We also have the small intestine. So these ones rarely get cancer. We are not saying they don't get, but they rarely get cancer. Spleen is also one of the organs that rarely has cancer. And the reason is, if you consider these organs, there's a lot of activity in these organs. The heart is always moving. The muscles are moving. The small intestines are moving. If you look at the blood supply in these areas, they have a very dense vascular network that supplies them with a lot of blood. So this would mean that movement is very important when it comes to combating cancer. We also need adequate and constant supply of blood for us to be able to combat cancer. And this is what is characteristic of these organs. The spleen has a lot of blood supply. And then there is a lot of activity in these organs. So the more active we are, the easier we shall be able to combat cancer. Now let's move directly to the objections against certain claims of conventional wisdom concerning the disease we call cancer, or what we call the cancer scare. Now, the position of science concerning the origins of cancer is as a result of DNA mutation. So it is claimed that there is too rapid DNA mutation to the extent that the body is not able to correct those mutations in good time, and they end up becoming tumors. But the question we're asking, is this true? Do you have rapid DNA mutation, and for that reason we have continued growth of those cells to the extent now we are forming very large tumors? Let's understand to start with that not all cancers come as a result or form as a result of genetic mutation. We have cancers that form as a result of inflammatory conditions, which could be as a result of hormonal imbalances, such as breast cancer. Breast cancer, it's not about genetic mutation. So that position of genetic mutation does not cover all the cancers, because not all of them are directly linked to genetic mutation. A tumor like a breast cancer has a lot to do with epigenetic mutations, including hormonal imbalances. And that is why you do not find these cancers when the girls are being born. You don't find these cancers in the first 5 years, because you expect a disease to take opportunity when a baby has low immunity, so as to form in the subject. But why these cancers have to wait until somebody is mature, they are of age, then it means it has something to do with acquisition. So they have acquired certain offenders in the environment that have changed their cells and have ended up forming those cancers. Of importance also is to note that anytime a cell mutates, it should be so consistent in nature that mutation of any cell should not lead to continued growth. There's a natural code in the human body that anytime there is mutation, the cell should be isolated by the body and it should die. We cannot have immortality among sinful cells, because this would propagate the idea that there is immortality in sin. So when these cells mutate, they are supposed to die. That is the natural expectation. So any of those risks we mentioned, the risk factors that we mentioned, whether it's radiation, whether it's bad nutrition, whether it's dehydration, whether it's pollutants, they will cause damage to cells. And when the cells are badly damaged, they die. This is what we expect. And if you want to know that the idea of genetic mutation may not hold. Now, if you say that cells are rapidly mutating, the question we're asking ourselves is, why have the drugs for cancer not changed? Because we still have the same old drugs. And because you cannot predict the extent of the mutation or when mutation is going to stop, if something mutates, it continues to mutate. Therefore, why do we have the same drugs for cancers that are said to be mutating? Then we should also be mutating the drugs. But this is not the case. So conventional wisdom knows that the idea of mutation does not hold. Then also understand this other important point, that it is claimed that cancer has rapid dysregulated cell growth. So we have cell division that is uncontrolled. So the cancerous cells has lost communication or signals with the rest of the cells, so that it is not inhibited in any way or regulated by other cells. So the question we're asking is, now, because it's that growth that will make those cells immortal, because they are said to have a growth signal, then we do not expect reproduction to continue if a cell has mutated. And I think I mentioned that point. It is the normal cells that replicate. So what actually happens with a cancer, with a tumor? Why does it grow? Because if they are not growing, if it's not the cancer cells that are growing, so what is growing? And I'll tell you what is growing. The cancerous cells or the fungal cells are enclosed or encapsulated. But you see, fungus projects roots. So every time the body has to mobilize energy in form of cells to go to that area so that they can continue encapsulating. And anytime the body tries to isolate, encapsulate the area, the fungal cells continues to generate roots further and further that are producing poison. So the body continues to send more cells and the tumor continues to grow. So what is growing, and this is consistent with nature, is the normal cells that have been mobilized with the orders to ensure that the tissue or the tumor is encapsulated and insulated. So that is how you end up growing a very big tumor. And you can be sure of this because the cells inside where the mass is, they are always white. So if you cut a mass that is a cancerous tumor, if you cut it into two, the center of it is always white. So if it is white, it means it is not supplied with blood vessels. So I do not expect a white tissue that does not have blood supply to grow. So what grows are the cells outside the mass. And those are the cells that have been tasked with the work of isolating the mass, and they will be rapidly growing because they are growing as rapidly as the poison from the fungal cells is being generated. So this should be the understanding as far as growth of this tumor is concerned. So I'll tell you something to confirm this point. Do you know that if somebody has breast cancer that is so huge and they are supposed to undergo surgery, they have to take what we call neoadjuvant chemotherapy. That is the chemotherapy they take before they go to surgery to shrink the tumor. So the chemotherapy targets the cells surrounding the tumor. These are the body cells. And the chemotherapy is going to burn the blood supply, the oxygen supply, the nutrient supply to the tumor. And that is how the tumor is going to shrink. So the chemotherapy does not reach the center of the tumor. So the tumor starts to shrink from the surface where we have the normal healthy body cells. So that is how the tumor ends up shrinking. And conventional wisdom knows this because they say that such a tumor, especially the middle of the tumor, is always resistant to chemotherapy. So that is why they are targeting the surface of the tumor, because this is where we have the normal healthy body cells. So once the oxygen and the nutrients and the blood supply is cut off, the tumor is going to shrink. But unfortunately now, the only mechanism that nature had designed to isolate the tumor, now it has been cut off. This means that if you cut off the blood supply, you are likely to grow other cancerous cells or fungal cells. So that is the delicate balance as far as shrinking the tumor is concerned. Now, let's move to something else. Now, in cancer, we always hear of the word metastasis. So metastasis means that the cancerous cells are able to move or to migrate to other tissues. So they will end up going to another site away from the primary site. And once they land in the new site, they start growing. And the way they grow faster than where they were. So metastasis, to start with, has never been detected in blood. We have no tests to detect it in the blood cells, in blood. In fact, there are people who come in late stages, stage 3 or stage 4 of cancer, and they have been donating blood. But there is no screening method that has ever detected metastasis inside the blood. So the question we ask is, if we have mutated cells or cancerous cells that break off and enter the bloodstream, why are they not detected by screening of blood? So this simply explains that whatever has metastasized is not a cancerous cell, because that one could easily be detected by the available modalities for detecting or for screening. So the only explanation we have to this metastasis not being detected is if there were fungal spores, because fungal spores are so tiny that no screening method can detect them. And that is how they end up being released, implanting into other tissues, and they are accepted. Now, the other challenge we have to metastasis is this. Do you know, if you're talking of cancerous cells breaking off, getting to the bloodstream, and then implanting into other tissues and getting accommodated, do you know that the body, another tissue will not accommodate, will not integrate an abnormal cell into its body because the cell is unhealthy? So we have what we call cellular communication. And any cell that is unhealthy is marked for destruction, not for being integrated into other tissues. But you see, for metastasis, metastatic cells or cancerous cells, the way they implant into a new organ and they start growing into the new organ. Now that one defies the position that this is a cancerous cell. It's only a fungal spore that can easily implant into a new tissue and start growing. And the rate at which those metastatic cells grow is so faster than the primary tumor. Now that is not characteristic of a new cell that has metastasized. It is fungal spores that grow that fast. Then the other thing is, do you know there are some people who have metastasis, yet the primary tumor cannot be seen, cannot be detected. No imaging, no test can detect where the primary tumor is, yet they have metastasis. Now, the only explanation for that metastasis is a fungal spore, because those ones can be disseminated in microscopic form, and they can move anywhere. And you don't have to have a primary tumor to have fungal spores. They are everywhere where the cell is diseased and dead. So by default, they grow from a diseased and a dead cell. So the only explanation why we have people whose primary cancer has not been detected. So we say they have cancer of unknown primary origin. Then it's to explain it in the direction of fungal spores or fungal toxins. And that is important to know. So the idea of metastasis breaks apart when it comes to the fact that no testing has ever detected metastatic cells in the blood, and no screening method has ever found metastasis in the blood. And the other thing is, the circulatory system is closed. It is a closed system. So how do cancerous cells get out of a closed system without, first of all, affecting the blood vessels? Now, the only explanation we have is that fungal spores can attach to any position in the body, but they have preference sites where we have capillary beds. That is where we have organs with very small blood vessels, such that they can easily be trapped in those capillary beds. So fungal spores will start digging into those tissues and spreading their roots and then attaching to that area. But it's unlikely to have a metastatic cell attaching to the wall of a blood vessel. A fungal cell will attach to the wall of a blood vessel. Okay, the other important thing we need to know is it's so difficult to diagnose cancers in early stages. So we have 70% of patients in Kenya coming with late stage cancer. And why is this? Because we don't have any successful genetic testing. And if we don't have any successful genetic testing, it means these cancers cannot be detected early, and it also means they cannot come as a result, they are not coming as a result of genetic mutation. Otherwise, these mutations should have been detected. Then we also told by conventional wisdom that cancer evades immunity. The body's immunity is the principal agent of fighting cancer. But the question we always ask, why would you use drugs that break down the body's immunity if you know and if you believe that immunity is very important for fighting cancer? We cannot succeed against any cancer unless we have very good immunity. But if you develop a drug that is going to destroy the body's immunity, actually, are you helping or are you facilitating the development of more cancer? Okay? So it's important to know that in order to combat cancer, we have to develop a very good immunity. Now, the other thing which I have explained a little earlier is that the reason why tumors are associated with intense blood supply is because the natural tendency of the body, wherever there is a sick area or an area where we have poisons, it is to grow new blood vessels to ensure that that area is supplied with nutrients, and we have many cells, immune cells as possible, to ensure that that area is isolated and the disease is combated, so that the body mobilizes resources in the same proportion as the burden of the disease. So it's not strange to find that in areas where we have cancerous tumors, there's a lot of blood supply. This does not mean that it is the cancerous cells that are attracting or that are developing or that are stimulating that blood supply. It is the natural mechanism of the body to ensure that area is supplied with a lot of blood, because the resources should be as much as the burden of the disease. Then, to wind up, it's important to talk of, after treatment, by the standard treatment, there is always an expectation of recurrence or relapse of the tumor. And why do you have recurrence and relapse of the tumors? Is because standard treatment with chemotherapy will cause more dead tissues. So cells will continue to die. And we said that dead cells attract fungus. So there will be an everlasting generation of dead cells. And this will continue, or this will become a breeding ground for fungus, which is attracted by lifeless and also sick cells. Then it's important to know that any tumor resists the standard therapy, the chemotherapy, from getting into its core or the center, either because there's a fluid buildup around the tumor or because of the tissue stiffness, which causes resistance. And this tissue stiffness and buildup of fluid is because the cells inside that tumor, they are dead. That is why they are stiff. And if they are dead, meaning that is an attraction point for fungus. So from that point, the fungus is going to utilize the nutrients we said, the sugars, and also the glutamine. And if it exhausts all those nutrients, do you know what it's going to do? And this is common with all cancerous tumors. It is going to use fermentation as a method of generating energy. So it will be, the tumor will start to grow by fermentation. And this is characteristic of all cancerous tumors. So it is not that it is a characteristic of cancerous cells, but it's because the environment created by the fungus after consuming all the glutamine and all the glucose, then whatever is left, they are dead cells without energy, without glutamine, and therefore the fungus can survive in a fermentation atmosphere. Something else we need to know about cancers, or about cancerous cells, if we have cancerous cells, is if the body has cells that have a growth factor, they are continuing to grow, then we do not expect that they are going to form an ulcer. It is uncommon for cells that are just growing to form ulcers, because we have so many cases of cells that mutate, but they do not form ulcers. Now, anytime you see an ulcer, there is a fungal component in that ulcer. So that is why you find people who have chronic ulcers, those ulcers can end up leading to cancer or cancerous tumors. Why? Because that chronic inflammation and the presence of fungus will itself cause cancer. So we have the ulceration leading to cancer, and never cancer leading to ulceration. So this confirms that the presence of fungal spores and fungus will lead to cancer, which is actually leprosy. And then it will spread, it will metastasize. Those fungal spores will move to the rest of the body and cause what we call metastasis. So that is very important. Now, because fungal spores, once they have metastasized, they have high avidity. They love glucose and glutamine a lot, because fungus grows so fast once it has metastasized. And for it to grow so fast, it has to use sugar a lot. So that is why if patients go for PET scan to look for metastasis, they have to be injected with a glucose tracer. That is with a substance which has been laced with glucose, and then they will be monitored in a PET scan. So wherever the metastases or the fungal spores are, they attract that sugar tracer in that radioactive substance, and then they will shine. So that is how they are able to find metastases in different parts of the body. It's because fungal spores have high affinity for glucose, and it's possible to pick this one on a PET scan. And of course, something else I need to say is that you have noted that whenever a cancerous tumor or a tumor is growing, it starts with a normal cell. That is, if you are to study the cell on a microscope, you find there is no difference between the cell that is cancerous and the normal cells. So they have the same morphology or pattern. But why is it after some time the cell loses the likeness of other cells and becomes different? Now, if it was to be, or if it only had a growth factor and it was dividing rapidly, then I do not expect it to change its morphology. If the issue was just dividing rapidly, okay, it should not have changed its morphology to the extent that it has become so different to the extent you cannot, we say it's poorly differentiated. That is, it has no resemblance with the ordinary cells. Now, the only explanation we can give as to why this cell has changed so much to the extent it does not resemble the other cells, then there must be an infiltration or invasion of a poison such as a fungal cell, because those are the cells that bring this differentiation, that is, this difference between healthy and sick cells. So we expect that whenever there is invasion of our normal cells, then they change. Otherwise, if the issue was just multiplication of cells that belong to us rapidly, we do not expect a lot of change. And lastly, it's important to know that associating cancer with aging, it is not something that we can say it's tenable or convincing. And the reason is, aging should not be a cause of cancer. But the only way you can associate aging with cancer is because the cells are becoming sickly and they are becoming redundant and they are becoming dead faster than when somebody was young. And therefore that explains that the only substance or molecule that can take advantage of a lifeless, sickly, aging cell, it's a fungal spore, because these ones love lifeless and aged and sick cells. So with those objections, you can know that actually we need to have another viewpoint of cancer. And if we look at cancer in terms of being or originating from damage to cells, and then fungus taking advantage of those damaged cells and starting to grow, then we'll have the solution to a disease that has remained a mystery and whose cure has not been found. This is the only way we can have a permanent solution by using this perspective. We can only have a permanent solution through this perspective. And eventually, we can get the ultimate cure for this cancer disease, which is a scare to men. Thank you so much. Continue to like, share, and subscribe. Let's meet in the next presentation.